What's up, wild ones? Today's project is something that I had no idea even existed. So a couple weeks ago, I put out my cat step video, and then after that, I had a couple parents message me asking about toddler towers, and I had no idea what those were. So what a toddler tower is, it's also called a learning tower. It just lets the little ones get up to the height of the counter or the kitchen table so they can see what mom and dad are doing and maybe learn something, maybe help out a little, I don't know. But this way, it'll keep them nice and secure on the inside, and they're not gonna fall and hurt themselves. So this is what we're building on Wild Rose DIY.
So the first thing I'm going to do is just cut out all the pieces for the frame of the toddler tower. I'm actually going to build two of these for a set of twins I know. I'm going to build the towers 32 inches high because that should put me just right underneath any countertop that these might be going underneath. When I was researching this project, I saw a whole bunch of different ways to do it, just like anything. I decided to use 2x2s for mine because I could round over the edges with my router and give it a really nice look, and it'll also make sure that the towers are nice and light so these little munchkins can still push them around on their own. Then while I had my pieces lined up, I drew a line and drilled out all my pilot holes at the same time so they're right at the same level. I made sure all my ends were lined up and did the exact same thing on the bottom. I drew a second line because that's where I was going to line up a supporting member. Then I flipped all my pieces over, as you can see, and then used the bar clamp to clamp them at the top and bottom together so I could cut some dados in there and make sure that they're all at the exact same height. The reason I'm cutting dados in here is so I can take out the top step and move it up and down just to grow with the child, so hopefully they get more use out of it. Now there's lots of different ways you can do dados. I decided that the easiest way for me was just to use my circular saw. And after I just cut a whole bunch of lines, what you can do is either take a chisel and just chisel them out, but I left mine elsewhere, so I went ahead and just cleaned it all up using my router. On the prototype I originally built, I just used my router to do the entire dado, but I found that it really blew out the ends and kind of ruined it and didn't make it look so nice. So that's why I used my circular saw instead, and then just cleaned up the remaining bits with my router. So as I did with my cat steps, I also used my Craig pocket hole bit to drill all the holes. So it leaves a nice 3/8 hole, but it also does a bit of a pilot hole. But I had to use a smaller bit to drill the pilot hole all the way through to my other piece. Then I could screw everything together, and then once I had everything together, then I could just go ahead and fill in all my 3/8 holes with the 3/8 dowel and cover up all my screw holes. So now I'm just assembling my frame and trying to make sure everything is as square as possible. If one little thing gets out, then that's going to cascade down the line and nothing is going to be straight and you're going to hate your life. Trust me, I know from experience. Since there's only room to put one screw in on these 2x2 pieces, it's really important that you glue it into place because otherwise your rails could just spin all over the place and you don't want that either. Now I'm just adding in what are going to be the supports for the bottom step. This one is going to be stationary and always be in the same spot. I used a spacer that was the same length as my top rail before I screwed this in, just to make sure it stayed square. Then I repeated the process on the other side. Then I flipped the tower right side up and glued and screwed in pieces for a bottom stair support. Next, I started assembling my gate. I just used my speed square to mark out where I was going to drill my pilot holes. This is where I was saying that it's really important to make sure everything goes together square. These were just a little bit out and you could definitely tell in the finished product. Then I use my palm router just to round over all the edges. Then I did the same thing on top of the tower, just to make sure that it was nice and smooth for little hands. Once I had the main frame together, I just took my 3/8 dowel, threw a little glue on them, and then just cut them off flush. Once all my screw holes were filled in, I could just go ahead and sand them flush. So I didn't have any wood that was going to be wide enough to act as the movable step. So what I did was took a 8-inch piece and I ripped the factory edge off of it so I could go ahead and glue 2 of them together. After I sawed the piece in half, I could go ahead and glue the 2 pieces together. There's a couple different ways you can do this, including using biscuits or dowel joinery or even pocket holes. I went ahead and just glued it together normally. When you're clamping pieces together like this, you want to make sure that the seam is as flat and flush as possible, just to save you more work in the long run. You also want to avoid over tightening your clamps, because that could cause your piece to bow. While I let that dry, I took a couple of scrap pieces and put them over the back of the Dados. I just used a little glue and my brad nailer. This way, when you slide the steps into place, they can't slide out the back. Then I just used a little bit of wood putty to fill in all the nail holes. After that dried, I could go ahead and sand it flush. I hate sanding. It sucks. But when little ones are involved, you want to make sure it's as smooth as possible because you don't want the little guys getting a sliver. While I was waiting on the glue to dry on my adjustable stair, I went ahead and made a bottom stair. I just cut it down to length on the chop saw, and then I cut it down to width using my table saw. I just moved over my fence to the desired width, made sure my blade was high enough, and then just ripped these bad boys down. Then I just used my palm router again to round over all the edges. By this time the glue had finished drying on the boards I was laminating together, so I could go ahead and cut those down to size. Now, since there's only going to be support in the 4 corners and not all the way across, I became a little bit worried about the boards coming apart at the seam, so I just made some little support pieces that I decided to glue and screw underneath to keep the boards together. I also used my roundover bit on the front of the step only. Then I just used my pocket hole bit again to drill some pilot holes in my support pieces. Perfect fit. So I decided to stain the steps and paint the frame. It's basically going to look the same as the cat steps because that's what I have on hand. Same as before, we're just going to use a little bit of wood conditioner and then a little bit of stain. After you let the stain soak into the wood, make sure you go ahead and wipe off any excess. Otherwise, you're going to have a really blotchy finish and you don't want that. I saw this triple thick one coat clear finish in the store, so I thought I'd give that a try. It's okay. You might want to do 2 coats with it and then a little light sanding in between. But it turned out pretty decent. Then I just wiped off all the sawdust from the frame and took it downstairs and painted it white. Then once the frame was painted and my finish was all dry, I could go ahead and screw on the bottom step. Then I just used some piano hinges and wafer screws for the gate. Then I just drilled a pilot hole and I put in a hook and eye just to keep the gate closed. Then I could slide in the step, and this baby is pretty much done.
Okay guys, so that's it. Another one in the books. It took me a little bit to figure out a design that worked, but I'm pretty happy with this because you can move these, move the stairs out as your kid grows. So hopefully you get a lot of years out of it. And then you can just lock this in place. Your stop's at the back so the step can't slide outwards, and then once the gate is closed, then it won't come forward either. So that way your step will stay nice and secure. Little guy's not going anywhere. So hopefully they can get a lot of use out of this. If you want to make one of these, the instructions are there. You know, all this, that classic stuff. Like, subscribe if you want. It would be really helpful to me. Stay tuned. We got some really cool stuff coming up. Hope we see you next time. The Wild Rose DIY.